I'm very excited to be able to introduce Mark Zeman to the stage today. Mark has travelled all the way from New Zealand. He has a creative background. He used to be a creative director once upon a time, cares very much about the experiences people have on the web, and of course how that bleeds through to performance, or is influenced rather by performance. So as the founder of SpeedCurve, that does all kinds of user monitoring and benchmarking and all of the rest of it. I had a wonderful conversation with Mark just yesterday, hearing about how the language we use when we talk about the building blocks of the web influences various things, and how we think about that and what we should be measuring, and how it opened up all sorts of possibilities for me. I was really interested in that. So thankfully we have a talk on that subject today. So let's start, as we mean to go on, with lots and lots of noise in this room. A huge round of applause, please, for Mark Zeman.
Thank you. Good morning. I just want to start by saying it's an absolute privilege to be here. This is my first Perf Now, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank the co-chairs, Tammy, Harry, Tim, for keeping our web Perf community alive. As many of you know, conferences have come and gone. We've had Velocity, we've had Fluent, we've had all sorts of things. This is all we've got left. And so it's really special that we keep this going. Thank you to PPK and Crine. It's just great that we're here today. And I also want to thank you for coming as well. So just a round of applause, please, for the organisers. And so while I was thinking about why I love this conference so much, and I love the WebPerf community so much, I was reminded of a conversation that I had over 20 years ago now. And I had dinner one night with a journalist, and he was retired. He was pretty old, he was pretty cranky. We spent all night debating things. And this was before the dot-com bubble. I was still young, I was still enthusiastic. I think, I spent most of the night talking about the web and the internet, and how much excitement and enthusiasm I felt about that. And probably talked about things like, how it democratizes location, that information was going to, transform the way that we interact, that humanity was going to evolve through this thing we call the internet. And I still kind of believe those things. And I remember at the end of the night, he kind of turned to me and went, I've met a lot of idealists in my time, and most of the time they are quite jaded and quite cynical. And he said, you know what, this is probably the first time that I've actually met, is that working? A hopeful idealist. And that label kind of stuck. And I really, I like that. And for the last 20 years, I've gone, okay, that's me. I'm a hopeful idealist. That's the thing that allowed me to start a company, to do all sorts of other things, to reach out to the Perth community that has been so supportive of a little old Kiwi from the edge of the planet, from New Zealand. And it made me think about this conference as well, and what we do at conferences. And so, this is what we're doing here. We're putting together a whole lot of ideas. We're trying to be hopeful. We've got some wonderful speakers here. I can see Matt Hobbs down the front here, the government digital services from the UK. I'm sure you've all come across them before, but they literally transformed the way that government departments interact and bring sort of democratic ideals to making information accessible, and they've inspired governments all around the world to do that. To me, that is an organisation that has that hopeful idealism to it. Tim Cadillac, his talks, I'm not sure what he's going to talk about, but often we talk about accessibility, about the impact that JavaScript has on people on slow mobile devices. He reminds us that we need to think beyond just the little tech bubbles that we can live in sometimes. So those are all, wonderful things that I hope we all do at the conference over the next couple of days. And so I'd like to invite you to join in with me and to also be hopeful idealists. Yeah, I've got one. Yeah, so make some noise if you're a hopeful idealist. Come on. Woo! Nice. Okay. So I need to start with a confession. When I started putting this talk together a wee while back, I also discovered AI. And I spent a lot of time talking to ChatGPT, and I spent even more time interacting with Midjourney. And if you haven't come across Midjourney, Midjourney is a generative image AI where you put in simple prompts and it generates imagery for you. And so in the development of this talk, I spent probably more time in those tools just playing and marveling at what has been created and allowed me to create than I did the actual talk. So today you're going to see a whole lot of imagery. Most of it is generated in Midjourney, and it's a bonus as to what you're going to see. And you're going to laugh at this, but one of the very first things that I did, one of the first prompts that I put into Midjourney was actually my master password. And you're probably wondering at this point, who is this fool? Let's send him back to New Zealand. I'm not going to trust anything he says from this point on, but bear with me. This is my, it's not working very well. This is my sniff test. So this is my master password. This is the phrase, the affirmation that I use to unlock my whole digital life. And for me, this is a bit of a sniff test. So I think we're a long, long way away from the singularity, from general AI. And so this is my test. If I put my master password into the AI and it doesn't immediately hack me, then I know that it's not sentient in any kind of possible way. And I don't know, you guys might have the last laugh. Like in a couple of years, I might be some meme. Remember that guy that put his master password into the AI? It finally hacked him. It took his full self-driving Tesla and it drove off into the distance with his Roomba. It's like, who knows what's going to happen? And so as I look at this image, what I want to really dive into today is like, what am I doing on that laptop? What is that thing in front of me? And like the hopeful idealist that I talked about earlier, to me, language is really, really important. And, oh my gosh. Language is really important, and to me, it expresses a intentionality. And so I want to talk a lot today about words and how words shape the way that we build things. And so the first word that I really want to dig apart here is this idea of the page. And 30 years ago, when the web was starting to evolve, we came up with this language, these sorts of ideas that helped us understand what the web was. We had pages, we had sites, there was a web. I seem to remember quite a few spiders. I'm not sure where they've all sort of gone. And we surfed from like page to page. That was fun. And so I really want to break this down and think about the language we use. There's other language that we use when we're talking about interaction. Often you hear people talking about making their interaction buttery smooth. And so when I asked the AI to put these ideas together, give me a buttery smooth page. I don't know. Is this the internet? Are we doing it well? Looks kind of tasty. I'm just, do I want to lick that? I don't know. I'm not sure. And so the sort of hypothesis I have for you today is that thinking in pages, that the language we have, it is actually, it does create constraints. And to me, at this point in time, 30 years in, it started to become quite monolithic. And I really want to pull those apart today, think about how we can deconstruct the page and reimagine it to build the next set of web experiences. So I want to bust up that monolith. I've been having nightmares about this space ape kind of top, kind of right there. I don't know what that is. Is that what we're going to evolve into? Let's burn those pages down. And you can see here why I'm so enamored by Mid-Journey. This was the prompt behind this image. A simple sentence, it's not even grammatically correct, it's just a bunch of keywords. And look what it's generated. The shading, putting these ideas together, like it really is phenomenal. And so how are we going to pull apart this page? And so my background is in design, and I started out in design and then transitioned into code. And the thing that always occurs to me when I put my user experience hat on and I come at it from that direction is that rather than thinking about the code, it's actually about the pixels that are on screen. And to me, not all those pixels have the same value. So how we build and organize those pixels, how we actually ship them, are really kind of fundamental. And that's what we're going to look at today. So what do I mean by that? If we take a simple marketing site here for a mountain bike website, how might we divide that up? And so you might imagine that you're building this with some divs, you're putting some elements together. We're going to talk about these as sort of islands of content and explore how we might do this. So our loose kind of theme today is islands. We're going to think about how we take an island of content, how we actually approach that from a design process, how we then might build that, and then finally how we can then measure those islands of content and hopefully move on from the page. Okay, so designing. Something that I have really noticed over my career is a shift from where we started out, where a web designer did both the code and the design, and it was a single role. And over time, we have broken that role apart and turned it into specialization, and we now have, front end, back end, marketing, all sorts of things. And unfortunately, in certain points, and certainly in organizations of scale, we find ourselves in silos. And that really doesn't lead to good user experiences. And the classic example of this is when you get marketing, running away, going, these are the ideas we want to communicate. They then go to a design team. That design team might create a full static Photoshop kind of layout, get that signed off. Great, this is what we're building. And then it gets thrown over the fence to developers, mainly you folks, and you're just like, okay, how am I supposed to make this fast? It's got all these rich ideas in it. It's got so much in it. It just, you're kind of hampered from the outset by having to deliver something that you didn't have an involvement in the creation of it. And so the thing that I've found really successful throughout my career is no secret. Lots of people are kind of doing this now. And that is to have small interdisciplinary teams. And when I say small and collaborate early, I mean like really early. So in this example, it was a news website that we were creating, and in the room we literally had, the product owner, we had a UX researcher, we had a designer, and we had a developer, and they were all working in a very iterative fashion to create this experience. And most importantly, everybody was collaborating around the final output, which was actually in the browser. So the designer wasn't working in Photoshop, they weren't getting things signed off, and then the developer was there. We actually had a stream of content coming in, and from day one, we were iteratively working through ideas. And we had a weekly cycle where we created something in code that was an expression of an idea. The UX researcher went out and actually tested that, and then we fed that back into the next week. And so we iterated that for 5 or 6 weeks. And there are lots of opportunities to bring performance into the discussion when you do that, because you're immediately in code, you have a prototype from day one, you could put some measurement boundaries around that. You can talk about how fast or slow do we want this user experience to be. If we put too much JavaScript in there, what's going to happen? And we can identify that right in the creative process at the beginning. So if you're not already working in this sort of methodology, I'd really encourage you to try and do that, to try and get involved as early as possible in the design and development process so that it is collaborative. And if we think about our islands, what we're really talking about here is taking people out of those silos and putting them together on this small collaborative island where they work together and work on creating a new experience. And all sorts of things cropped up. So this was clearly a slow news day in New Zealand. A kumara is like a sweet potato, and so I think this was a Friday afternoon. I don't know, everyone in the newsroom must have been drinking beers or something, because this was the headline national news. And at this point in time, we realized maybe this is the right template. The content that's actually coming in, that was our real-time content that we're working with, it's not that great. Like, the image is a bit kind of, the headline. And so this caused us to, rethink some of our approaches. And if a designer was doing this in isolation, they would have found some, beautiful headline, a really nice kind of dramatic image. The client would have been looking at that same image the whole way through the design process and would have had it signed off. Then it would have gone into production and they would have seen issues like this. And so one of the key outcomes of this was not only design changes, but the product owner in the room went away and talked to the newsroom and just went, you can't do this. This is not good enough. Okay, the other thing that I want to do to try and break apart this page is that, to me, the idea of a page, that metaphor, doesn't really work for the web. I inherently believe that the web is a time-based medium. If you're thinking about a page, if you think about a nice coffee table book, you turn the page, boom, it's all there, it's already been rendered, you can enjoy it, it's great, it's good to go. That doesn't happen on the web. We click things, it can take seconds, sometimes tens of seconds to load things. How you actually spend that time is really, really important. And so we do have some tools and products that we can use to explore this. So this is a simple timeline where at the top, we're just looking at a frame every 10th of a second. We've got some key events, we've got CPU stuff at the bottom. The main thing I want to focus on here is just how long is it taking to, render this marketing page that just has a simple mountain bike on it. And what does that experience feel like as it kind of renders in? You're asking me to spend, it's nearly 10 seconds here of my life waiting for this content to come in. You probably thought it rendered instantly, but it just doesn't. And as you can see here, you can expand that waterfall, and at this point you're all probably going, what the heck? What is going on there? And we'll explore this a little bit later in the talk, but yes, hundreds of resources down in the waterfall, the hero image finally loads, and that's why it was 10 seconds or so into the page. And so this idea of breaking up the page, of thinking about teams, we can approach this in a number of different ways. So this might be how you construct your page, how you pull it apart. There's different dimensions and lenses we can put on this. Is it static content? Am I building an app that goes in that slot, that island? Who's responsible for those different parts of the page? And so rather than thinking in pages, once we start to break that content down, once we start to think about the pixels that are important, the way we group those pixels into islands, how might we approach that as an organization? And it can be really valuable to think about it with those different lenses on. Okay, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes. Building an island. So it's no surprise that we've been on quite a journey over the last 10 years. We started out with what we're now calling multi-page applications. I guess that was just, the web, the platform, whatever it used to be. And we've been through this real arc of exploring, I guess, developer convenience. And I love the frameworks that are out there now, the convenience that it creates, building components, working in React, Svelte, whatever your chosen platform is great, but we're now seeing the real downsides of those strategies. And it really is as simple as we're just shipping far too much into the client, into the browser. And we're expecting that browser to do a whole heap of work for us. And that might work on some of our modern devices on the end of fast connections, but it doesn't work for everybody. And so we do need to think about the next billion or so people that are coming onto the internet. They're often in places on mobile connections, they're on slower devices that don't have as much CPU and as much memory. And instead, we're jamming a whole lot of JavaScript into that client and expecting it to perform really well. And it simply doesn't. And so thankfully, over the last few years, we're starting to see a lot more discussion of the negative performance impact of our JavaScript frameworks and how we can address that. And so, as you can see here, there's various strategies around how we might approach that we're starting to explore. Server-side rendering, how can we do it all on the server? How can we then deliver some static HTML and then hydrate it? That has its own problems. How many times you're on a website and it looks like it should be interactive and you're like clicking away, and in the background it's still downloading a shit ton of JavaScript to try and make that page interactive, and it's just not there yet. So we've got ideas like progressive hydration, where we're trying to prioritize what it is that's coming down into the client. And so the new flavor of the month, I'm liking where this is starting to go, and that is islands architecture. And this is really a mixture, I think, of moving back to that multi-page app idea of using the platform as your primary delivery mechanism, like how the actual browser works, and then bringing in these islands of content and making them interactive when they need to be. And so Katie Sawyer-Miller at kind of Etsy coined this term, islands architecture. I think it's a really interesting idea. And it's a simple idea. It's going, let's get back to basic HTML, let's deliver that into the browser, and then really break apart the page and think about what needs to be interactive. And so if I have a whole lot of static content, that can be served from the CDN straight away into my user experience. I can see it, I can enjoy it. And then if there is something interactive, think about how that renders into my user experience, rather than locking the entire user experience behind a single page application and forcing me to wait for that to be instantiated and come alive on my browser. And it can really make a fundamental difference. And so the framework that's really championing islands architecture at the moment is Astro. I really encourage you to check it out. And so it is primarily a multi-page app-focused environment. And this really comes back to picking the right tool for the job. And so if you're a marketing site and you're delivering a lot of primarily static content, and then you just need a little bit of interactivity somewhere, this can be an absolutely fantastic approach. If you are genuinely building a single page application, and I would stress the application part of that, are you building something as complex as Gmail or something like that? Are you actually doing that? And if so, then a SPA might be appropriate. But I worry that people coming into our industry now are learning these frameworks as default. and they're using the same tool for all the same problems, and it's just not appropriate. And so Astro is something that I encourage you to check out. The stats here are quite entertaining, like they're true, but it's basically if you turn off the spa, it is faster. It's kind of that simple. It's also quite delightful in terms of the, it's only additive, which I really like. We're not replacing React, we're not replacing Svelte or Angular or whatever your chosen language is. You've already made that investment. You can use React here. You can build your designed components, you can put it all together, and then it just gets rendered as static HTML. And so this really is the best of both worlds, where you get to use all that lovely developer tooling, all that convenience, the collaboration across the team, but then it doesn't compromise the final output. It's still just static HTML, which is amazing. And then when one of your islands does actually need to be interactive, you can put this simple client load attribute onto it, and now into that island and just that part of the page, it will become a React app. And also there's some really nice methods here that allow you to manage how it actually loads. So should it load straight away, or should it lazy load? You know, if you've got some interactive component that's down the bottom of the page and it's out of the viewport, don't even need to load that on initial load. And then as I scroll, it'll lazy load in those components as required. So I really like this. I think this is a great approach to solving the conundrum that we find ourselves in with all the JavaScript that we're shipping, and being a lot more deliberate about the choices and the way we send that in. Just going to skip that one. And so the other thing that this reminds me of, which I'd love to see more discussion in the perf community about, is the critical rendering path. We used to talk about this quite a lot sort of 10 years ago, and I think it's still a really, really important concept. And it comes back to that time-based methodology that I was talking about earlier, and that is that this is a time-based medium. How we actually render into the page is really important. We're taking people's time. And so if you are stuck in one of those environments where it's just marketing, build this fully rendered experience, we can end up with these horrible moments where we've got a spinner or we've got a blank slate and we're waiting for lots of resources and lots of things to download before, boom, we see a page. That can often be a terrible experience, and there's no need for that. The browser has wonderful mechanisms in it to preload content, to manage priority. We can give it hints about the most important things to load first, and we can create a critical rendering path that unblocks some hints for our users. We can let them know that they are in the right place rather than staring at a blank page. We can give them some color, a logo, some elements, a bit of a skeleton. If you've seen talks about perceived performance, there are all sorts of design tricks that we can use to let people know you're in the right place, the experience is coming, it's here, it's good. And so if we go back to our marketing site and that terrible waterfall that we saw at the start, this is just an educated guess, but I think what has happened here is that on the right, we have this great little interactive app that tells me how much stock there is for this particular mountain bike. And if I put in my address, it'll tell me, does the local store have one? So some great functionality. And what I imagine happened in the team is they went, okay, let's build this little corner in React. And then they were like, well, if we're already doing that in kind of React, why don't we, put the model in, like the images for, the content right next to it. And if we're doing that, we've got all these other models on the website, we might as well shove those in our app as well. And suddenly this little bit of interactivity has eaten the whole page, and we've ended up delivering a whole lot of user experience in a spa when it really doesn't need to be. And All those resources you saw at the beginning was a whole bunch of CSS and JavaScript and all sorts of things for hundreds of models that are on this website. And we're forced to wait for all of that to come down the wire before I see the one actual image that I care about. And I can show you the impact of that. So this is not even a particularly slow connection. I think this is like 5 or 10 megabits on a desktop. And all I've done here is I've taken that very same content as static HTML, and I've put it up on a crappy instance somewhere on the internet, and I've just compared those two experiences. So it could be even faster than that. And the problem we see here is that the SPA and how long it takes to put that JavaScript together to then choose the particular model that I'm on, to then find that image and download it, means that we've defeated all the great tools that we have in the browser. Like the browser didn't see this image until about 5 or 6 seconds into the page. And then it doesn't actually render till 10.5 seconds here. That is a huge amount of time. There's nearly 9 seconds in there that is consumed by that SPA. This is terrible. This is terrible user experience. We shouldn't be doing this. When, if this was delivered as static HTML, we could be rendering this in, probably less than a second if we did this properly and had it cached on CDNs. And so what these people needed to do was to really have an islands architecture and go, great, this bit on the corner, this needs to be an app. Let's create an island around that. Let's deliver that as a rich experience. In that first second or so, I should see, is this the right model that I want to look at? I can be reading the specs. I could be engaging with all this content. And in the meantime, even if it took that 10 seconds, you could be loading that in the corner, putting that together, and then I can interact with that when I choose to. So I think, to me, this shows how powerful having a different methodology is to approaching the way that we construct our pages, if we think about them as islands of content. Okay, so how do we measure an island? Now, I'm really, really lucky. I get to live on a great island down in New Zealand on the edge of the planet. And I'm part of Speed Curve. We're a small company. We're spread all around the world. And Hawaii is kind of in the middle for most of us. Sorry, Andy, not for you. But it's kind of in the middle. So this is where we do our offsites. This is where we get together. And this is us. We're a small company. It's quite fun. A lot of people think that Speed Curve is some huge, big, multinational, VC-funded thing. It's not. This is us. There's only kind of 8 of us. We're bootstrapped. And just this last month, we turned 10 years old. So happy birthday to us. And we're all here at the conference. We like to sponsor the parties, so come and have a drink with us tonight. Bring your hopeful idealism. Because we're not VC backed and we have no politics, the only thing we really care about is our users and the features that they want. So come and talk to us tonight, hit us up. After the conference, we've got 5 days here at an offsite where we're deciding what we build next. So this is your chance to kind of, really feed into where we go next. Now, the only person missing is Steve. Steve's actually retired now, if you didn't know. He lives in Hawaii. This is all he does every day. He's out there. Look how happy he is. And so the reason that I wanted to take this tangent is I wanted to talk about metrics and small teams and our community and how accessible it is. And something that struck me when I transitioned from sort of design into web performance about 10 years ago now is that it was very engineering focused. Things were measured at the granularity of the page, and user experience felt like it was missing to me. And so I asked a lot of questions. We spent a lot of time brainstorming around what is the user experience And how might we measure that and represent that so that people can actually understand where the problems are? And one of the really simple ideas we had was that, in JavaScript, once the DOM was finished loading, we could, look at a particular element. We could find the largest element on the page. We could get a rectangle of what that element was. And then we also had this film strip. And we were like, hey, what if we just looked at the film strip and we looked inside that bounding box, and when all the pixels stop jiggling about, we tell you when that element has finished rendering. And so it was this really simple idea that we called hero times, where we could choose different elements on the page and we could tell you when they stopped rendering. There were issues with this. If you have animation or overlapping elements, sometimes it can make things tricky to measure, but it really sort of helped move, I think, metrics forward into thinking about the user experience and how we represent those. A number of years ago, kind of Paul Irish picked up on our idea of hero times. He liked thinking about, we had multiple heroes that we were measuring, and he was like, what about the last painted hero? And, Steve's sort of like the godfather of web performance, so he was the last painted hero. And then this idea evolved, and the Chrome sort of team went, okay, well, let's implement this in the browser and let's do it properly, not the hacky sort of way that we had done it with film strips. We're building the browser, we can actually understand and tell you when elements render. And so that led to largest contentful paint. And I use this as an example to, share some history, but also to encourage all of you that, we have a tremendously accessible community. And the thing that has always struck me is how welcoming the web performance community has been. When I turned up as a Kiwi 10 years ago and went, hey, why aren't we measuring, user experience? How might we do that? I was welcomed with open arms, and any idea can be, a good idea if it has merit and it'll travel. And so I encourage all of you, even if you think all this stuff gets decided in ivory towers somewhere, to participate. And conferences like these are great venues for throwing around these ideas. And so we've got largest contentful paint, cumulative layout shift, first input delay. You'll recognize these as our Chrome Web Vitals. And I just want to pause for a moment and I want us to say thank you to the Google team, because there is a number of people in the audience here today that have contributed to Core Web Vitals. And I think over the last few years, it's really led to a shift in the way that we talk about web performance. Largely for the better. So, can we have a round of applause for... And the reason it's been so great is that there has been lots of confusion in the industry. There's been so many different kind of metrics. And so to have someone champion and go, what about these as a set of metrics? What about if we focus on these? How might that work? And I think it has really helped us focus as a community on these three metrics. Now, a bit nervous about this next bit. It's kind of like breaking up with a girlfriend. It's not you, it's me. We're just going our own ways, we're growing in different things. I want to critique where we're at with Core Web Vitals. As much as I love where we've got to, I think we've got some challenges. If you take your web performance hat off for a moment and just look at these words on screen, can you imagine being new to web performance? Trying to understand these words, trying to understand the nuance and the complexity of what's going on here. We've got a couple of people on our team that are fairly new that have come into web performance, and it's taken them a long time to really transition from Lighthouse is wonderful, and seeing that score out of 100, that's really digestible. Those are great things. But that transition from the high-level abstraction into these sets of metrics, I think that is deeply challenging. And a lot of that is to do with the words. And it's also to do with how quickly this space evolves. As you may know, we've got first input delay. We had some issues with that. It didn't really give us enough feedback in terms of being a good metric. So that's being deprecated. In March, we're switching to interaction to next paint. What's that about? Got to learn a whole new thing there. Does anyone remember this one? First meaningful paint? Oh, I love this metric so much. It's look at it. First meaningful paint. Finally, a metric that tells me what it is. It's meaningful. This is the only one I need to care about. And it's it went away. I don't exactly know why. It was, something to some bipolar metric, it all got complicated. And so this has been deprecated and it's gone away. Something else I've been struggling with recently is cumulative layout shift in the windows. We talk to people all the time that still don't understand how this metric has evolved. And I'd be keen to get a show of hands. So if you may not realize it, when cumulative layout shift first came out, it was all the shifts. So all the shifts got added together and it would have been the 0.43 there. But then we realized, well, there's an issue there because spars are really long-lived and it's a page, but it's not. And so we came up with this idea of windowing, which is great. So now we have this traveling 5-second window and it resets every couple of seconds when there's a gap in the rendering. And then the cumulative layout shift that gets measured is the one that's in the largest window. And here you can see part of the problem with that. As a user experience person, I care about all the layout shifts. These two shifts here that are being ignored, that are big shifts, I still want to fix those, but they are now invisible in terms of the cumulative layout shift. And I think to me this all speaks to how difficult these words are. And so when you say cumulative layout shift, people automatically assume it's the accumulation of all the layout shifts. And so, but it's not anymore. And this is great. This is good movement in terms of what we need to do with metrics, but it's still, it's just hard. Yeah, it's me. I'm struggling with this relationship with Core Web Vitals. There's other challenges we have in these metrics. So unexpected LCP, depending on the viewport, sometimes the element that gets chosen as LCP is not the one that you expect it to be. So in this example, when the cookie consent pops up, that paragraph of text is actually bigger than the H1, the first item in the list here, which, I probably keep thinking that it's this one when I'm looking at my metrics, but actually a lot of times it's this one. And so there's all sorts of challenges with these metrics. Sometimes we have bugs. So these images will look kind of the same. Per the spec, that first bag should be LCP. It's not, it's the second one. Woo! And, all credit to the Google team. They work on a lot of these issues. They're really important metrics. We're trying to kind of fix them. And so I want to break up. I want a new girlfriend. And I want this to be my new girlfriend. The Web Performance Working Group, I think, is an underrated and unloved section of our community that we all need to spend more time getting behind. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is just browser support. So a lot of the metrics, a lot of the core Web Vitals are still Chrome only. And we just can't continue to ignore large parts of our user base. Some websites have a lot of mobile traffic that can be Safari only. To have no visibility into that just doesn't work. And so the more we can get behind our standards bodies, but the more we can have cross-browser support for metrics, the better. I've just got to take a quick time out and talk about this logo. Is Yoav here? Did he draw this? I've seen some of his drawings in previous presentations, and what is that? I don't know. Is it a cat? If you picked up a cat, when you pick up a cat, it goes really floppy. If you put wings on that, and it's isn't that going to be really slow? I don't know. I struggle with the logo, I've got to say. I think we could do better. And so in my alternate universe where I've broken up with Core Web Vitals, what is that relationship based around? And it might surprise you to know that if I had to pick just one metric that I wanted this body to implement across all browsers, it actually wouldn't be any of the Core Web Vitals. It would be this one. It'd be element timing. And the reason that I like this approach, this is an experimental spec that's already implemented in Chrome. You can use this today, and it's really, really simple, and that's why I love it. You can put this attribute, element timing equals whatever the name you want it to be represented as, and you can put this on an image or a text node. I'd love it if I could put it on a div or something like that and just sort of break up my page and understand when that particular element got rendered. And to me, that takes a lot of the complexity out of this because I know my own website. I know what's important. And I can choose those elements that are really important and then measure them. And so to me, it becomes really simple. And so this is supported in Rum and Synthetic. As far as I know, SpeedCurve is still the only product out there that supports element timing. So you can do this today. You can add more. Yeah? Who's that? Is that Debug Bear? RumVision. Yay. I'd love everyone to support this. I think this is a great spec. So you can use this today in RumVision, in SpeedCurve, hopefully in more vendors soon, to just say, this is the element that I care about. Tell me when it renders. And why is that so important? And to me, it's because of this. And it's that getting an organization to care about performance culture, can be really challenging. And so when you define an element and you decide to measure it, you make that so much more easier. I don't know about you, but when I have to get in front of people and try and explain LCP and cumulative layout shift and all those acronyms, all those concepts, and trying to get a whole organization to care about that, we sort of get it. I think even amongst us, there's debates as to how things work and how they should work, but trying to get someone in marketing or someone in design to care about those metrics can be really, really tough. But if you worked at somewhere like Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it now, and you had a time to first tweet, that is a metric name that instantly travels and is recognizable throughout that organization. And I think you can probably look at your own products and think of an equivalent metric that if you could just measure, in this case, when is the first tweet, when is it the first item in my cart, when does that come together, then how much easier would that be? And this is why I love element timing so much and why I'd love to see it supported in all our browsers. And then I'd be really happy with my new relationship. All right, winding it up. So, the takeaways that I have for you today is I'd really love you to think about these smaller islands, think about the language we use and how we can move on and stream content into the browser. Just changing some of that language can really change how we think about our experiences and the way that we build them. Don't prioritize the developer experience over user experience, please. Everything has a cost, especially those spas. I think we all kind of are starting to understand this now. It's got to be a balance. Keep measurements simple and keep it really easy for people to understand across the whole organization rather than just the developers. We want to build that performance culture. And so what I'd really like you to do is to move your mental model away from, I'm a coder, I'm a hacker, I'm pushing code every time I deploy. Thinking like that keeps us focused on the tools, it keeps us focused on the frameworks, the mechanics of like what I'm actually doing. I want you to, the next time you're doing a deploy and you're drumming your fingers, waiting for it to kind of hit production, say to yourself, I'm pushing pixels. I'm not pushing code. And then, who are the people that are seeing those pixels? What is their experience like? How can I deliver a better user experience for them? How can I push better pixels? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Fantastic way to start the day. Mark, do you want to come and join me?
Yes, I do.
I called this the lounge earlier on. I don't know what I was thinking. This is an odd lounge, isn't it? Oh, up we go. What a brilliant start to the conference. I'm nodding along furiously to so many of the things that you mentioned. There were quite a few questions. I'm going to leave some of them for the chat upstairs and be quite thrifty here. But MPA, SPA, SSR, CSR, ESR, FML. It feels like acronyms are everywhere, right? And you call out the importance of language and the fact that MPA and SPA in particular have this word application in them, and it feels like that implies that we're building something of a particular stature. How can we get past that kind of issue? Because it feels like we're encouraging people to ship more code potentially, or use things that feel more complex. So Brian asked, how do we convince others to reduce the amount of code they ship? And I'm just kind of curious about how language impacts that and how we can possibly address that, since it feels like we're always adding more complexity and innovation.
I think it's a tricky one. What it reminds me of is an experience I had when I was still working as a creative director. And I was talking earlier to Sergey, and it was like, is it numbers that motivates people to change, or is it visuals, or is it a combo of the both? And we were working on this website that had a tremendous amount of third parties. Marketing teams from around the world were just dumping in remarketing tags, all sorts of things. And it was a problem. And we couldn't get any movement based on the metrics. And the only thing that worked is I created 2 film strips. No numbers on them at all, 2 film strips. One had all the third-party stuff turned off, and the other one didn't.
Right.
And there was about a 3-second rendering difference. And when I put that in front of the board, they were like, what's that?
Yeah.
What's that empty hole? What's going on? And we were like, well, that's the impact of your third parties. That's the impact of, I guess, making this an application.
Right.
And that simple visual led to a board decision where they were like, turn it off today. Just turn off all the third parties. Like, we'll make them squeal, we'll figure it out, they'll do a proper audit, we'll move. And so I bring that up because it's not always the numbers and it's not always the technical stuff that can convince an organization that an application isn't necessarily the right idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be really tangible, right?
Yeah.
So people have to feel the pain. And I guess the challenge is making that happen early enough so that you're not committed.
Yeah,
right?
and communicating in a way that works across the organisation.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I've got a list of questions that I'd love to get to, but you are prepared to go up to the speaker table and talk to folks around the audience, around the conference rather, for the rest of the time, right?
Yes.
Amazing. Okay, so in which case I'm going to cut us short. Thank you so much for a wonderful start to the day. A massive round of applause, please, for Mark Zeman.
Thank you,
Mark. Thanks so much.